All right, Jake, it is time to talk about PR.
Ooh, are we live?
Yeah, we're live. We're live right
Ooh.
now. We're live.
Oh my gosh.
You are live, Jake. You are live on LinkedIn. You are live on Facebook. You are live on YouTube.
Wow.
This may or may not be on Fox News. I haven't checked. My TV's not on, so they may be picking up this feed as well, possibly. But okay, so let's talk about where this started. So there was a thread in the CMO Slack group that we're both part of, where someone said, "Hey, I'm looking for a PR firm, and I'd love to get some recommendations of who I should talk to." And what started with here's who PR firms I like working with and why, quickly became well, here's things you should be watching for. Here's some cautionary tales about hiring PR firms. Here's some things you should be looking for that are positive attributes. Here's some things that might be yellow flags and red flags. And so thought we'd have some. I mean, hopefully we're going to make this constructive. We're going to make this useful. Also, look, if you've ever worked at a PR firm, if you've ever hired a PR firm, you may have some cautionary tales and stories as well. I certainly do. So full transparency. I worked at a PR firm back in the day. I was a reporter right out of school. I was a journalism major, worked for the Bremerton Sun, stationed in Olympia, covering state government for Olympic Peninsula. Worked at a PR firm after that, and then have hired PR firms and worked with PR firms ever since. And you, I mean, I want to speak for you, Jake, but I mean, you've got a significant background in media as well.
Yeah, I was a producer at a bunch of TV stations in California, including the Bay Area, and then WRC in DC, and then ran the news department at Cairo for here in Seattle, Cairo in Seattle, Channel 7 CBS, not Cairo, Egypt. So ran the news section, news division of the CBS station here. And I'm somebody who has taken more PR pitches than I know what to do with. Everything from, hey, my cooking guest, should be on your morning show, to, very serious stories or people pitching their companies. And I have to tell you, sitting in a newsroom, you get more bad PR pitches than good ones.
Yeah.
I'll tell one quick story to kick this off. So, unfortunately, in a local newsroom, one of the things that you cover a lot of, bad things. And I have to tell you, the worst thing that I can remember covering on a local level, not international terrorism or 9/11, is school shootings. And there was a time when we were in live coverage, and it hadn't just begun. We were probably in the 6th or 7th hour of live coverage, and somebody called the newsroom, a PR person, and we were busy, and the assignment editor said, "We can't talk right now," hung up on them. They called back and demanded to talk to the manager. Not only did we say we're never talking to that PR company again, but their client also got blackballed. Like, no way.
Yeah.
When I look for a PR person, one of the questions I always ask them, Matt, is tell me about your relationship with reporters, and by the way, what's going on in the news? I have an actual news conversation with them.
Yeah.
Those are, if they don't know what's going on in the news, how are they going to do PR?
So you bring up a good question, because relationship with reporters is important. Your approach with reporters is important. Like, even if you don't have a relationship, like the way you approach, the way you're empathetic about their situation, the way that you do a little bit of research on what a reporter's perspective is, what is their beat, what are the kind of stories they like to tell. I think that there's tactical things like, please stop calling to make sure they got the press release. But then also, even if you don't have a relationship, like what's in it for them? I mean, both of us are in the business now, sort of building pipelines in organizations. And so, thinking about what's in it for them from a sales perspective, decent analogies there with thinking about how you build relationships and get out from the media you're working with.
Yeah, totally true. Totally true. If you're sending a blast out of 500 emails, you're not going to be successful.
Right.
That's just that's not, it's not going to happen. We actually at Cairo had an inbox of PR emails, and there was one morning where our assignment manager had 50 come in between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. Just generic, like cover my event or cover my company or this or that. Um, so there's just no way, and people who have no relationships with you. And typically, when a company hires a large PR firm, one of the things that actually happens is you may have talked to this awesome partner who used to be a journalist and knows a lot or has been in PR, but then the person sending the email may be just out of college. And so, if the newsroom responds to that person, they're not going to get a fast response, and they're not, you create other problems there. But yeah, it's got to be tailored.
So another thing, just in terms of like hiring a PR firm, vetting a PR firm, I think is also making sure that they understand what a story is. Like, what is news? What's something that's going to be interesting outside the organization? I think a lot of PR firms, quite frankly, and like again, I speak from personal experience on this, have made a lot of money by writing up whatever story the company, the client wants to say, and then having their junior people just call down the media, like paying some. I was the super junior person who was paid probably like $15 an hour, billing out at 85 or something ridiculous, and just calling down a list saying like, hey, did you get the release? Are you going to write about it? Are you going to cover this? Right? Because like companies paying us, we need to put a coverage report. We need to show that we did our due diligence. And it just seems like in many cases, that's a lot of busy work that it doesn't produce tangible value back for the client, and may actually produce negative impact if the reporters you're calling are pissed that you called them and are now like, well, I'm not talking to that firm again, or that person again, or covering that company.
Yeah, let me actually take that to a whole other level, which is there's something called the video news release, where a PR firm will create a video story about a company or about an issue or something, and they'll send it to a newsroom. And sometimes you get an overnight producer who is looking for content and doesn't realize it's a video news release or hasn't read the ethics guidelines or whatever. And they play it on TV and online, and they get fired for that. The station faces fines for that. Like not only, and then once that becomes public that people get fired for this, then your company name is part of, hey, people got fired for running your story.
Yeah.
So, this, and you're right, people have to know what a story is. The idea that a journalist is just gonna, your company is so amazing that people are just gonna want to tell the story of your company. Unless you're Airbnb, that doesn't even exist. And even if you are Airbnb, it's not going to be the story you want it to be.
Yeah, well, and that's you hear the saying sometimes, like all PR is good PR. I don't know that that's true. Now, to your point, like if you're Elon Musk, anything you do is going to make headlines. If you're a certain company, especially publicly traded company, like there's the things big companies do gets covered. I think a lot of companies think, a lot of startups, a lot of unknown companies think they're the big company. And so if, back to our topic of like, how do you hire a PR firm? One of the questions I would certainly want you to ask anyone you're going to hire is, what is your strategy for getting us coverage? What is your strategy for getting our story out there? And part of what I want to hear back is some pushback on helping the client say, like, what is your story? Just because you launched a new feature doesn't mean that's a press release. And even if you want to put it in a press release, please don't assume everyone's going to like rush out to write about it. But like it's not about your story, it's about the story your audience cares about, both the reporters as well as their end audience. So when hearing some kind of articulate sort of articulation, how you like that? Put that in a press release. Some articulation with some discipline of what's good news, what make for a story. And I think there's responsibility from the company hiring the PR firm to also understand the answer to that question. Are you doing this as a vanity project for the CEO? Are you doing this because you have a sort of a false understanding of how the media works? And I think, as a PR firm, you have a responsibility for telling it straight to your client about what works and what doesn't. Because if you don't, there's just going to be a lot of thrashing, a lot of miscommunication, a lot of unsuccessful efforts, and then both are going to walk away unhappy. Well, you could have avoided that to begin with.
You touched on something in there that I think is really important, which is, why are you hiring a PR company?
Right.
Like, what's your purpose in doing it? And by the way, there's not a right or wrong answer to that. Different companies have different purposes in hiring a PR company. So, are you hiring a PR company because you really just want to be in the news? Are you hiring a PR company because you want to get in front of a specific kind of customer or client? Are you hiring a PR company for just because for giant branding reasons, or because of egos? You're trying to satisfy an ego. Those are all, these are very different reasons to hire a PR company. And I can give you my opinions on what are the most important reasons to hire a PR company. But before you go out and look for one, figuring that out is really important. Because if you want one that's going to give you like whiz bang metrics and beautiful presentations and stuff, then you're going to want a different one than, hey, I just want you to know this industry and be, so I work in cybersecurity. When I went to look for a PR person, there are a lot of great firms in Seattle. But they're not expert in cybersecurity. I went looking for somebody who knew and knows, cyber reporters who report on cyber. Because it doesn't matter how big the firm is, if they don't have relationships already with those reporters. What, 900, 1,000 cyber companies in America? Think of how many pitches those reporters get.
Two of the best PR people I've had the chance to work with. One, back when I was at Microsoft, I worked in the real estate division of Microsoft, and I worked at Microsoft in that group, but I was at the PR firm working with them beforehand, and we had hired an industry consultant. Like it was a big general agency, and we hired a guy that really knew the real estate trade press, knew the real estate industry really well. And, shout out to Hugh Seiler. He's probably not watching this, but Hugh Seiler, he may not even be doing it anymore. Like, his long-term goal was to buy and manage properties, which is probably what he's doing, sitting on a beach in SoCal now. But
if only there was a tool to tell us what he's doing today.
Right. I feel like but Hugh, I miss you and I love you. And no, he knew. So he knew the language, he knew the industry, he knew all the insider information. He had deep relationships with all of the trade press. That, as we were trying to build a relationship with the brokers and the MLSs and the industry leadership, like getting in those in some cases, tiny little publications with huge influence over decision makers, right? Who did not want to get a call from 22-year-old Tiffany, who didn't know them at all and just was calling down a list, but who got a call from Hugh, and Hugh could say, like, okay, here's why this matters. Here's why So that was important. Also, another gentleman, Stephen Gottlieb, who's here in Seattle. And maybe there's something to the fact that like some of the best PR people I work with aren't at the big agencies. They're like independent people. There's something maybe there too. Stephen Gottlieb is one of the best storytellers I know. Right. And so he's got relationships. He can call up certain reporters and sort of have a conversation. They'll answer his phone call, but he's really good about the narrative. He's really good about saying, what is the story we are telling here? It's not about one press release. There's a body of work that over time should help people understand the narrative and story you want to tell. And I think that approach, like that the reason why I think Microsoft started to make some inroads in the real estate industry is because there was someone that could walk them in that said, no, these guys really, like, there's a lot of rumors and gossip about, hey, Microsoft's going to disintermediate real estate agents the way that they did travel agents. Not true, didn't happen. But having an insider help tell that story made a big difference.
Yeah, having somebody who knows the reporters, who can speak the language, who has those relationships is extremely, extremely important. So the PR person I use, just like you, is a woman named Danielle Ostrovsky. She does cybersecurity PR. She has one other woman working with her, and she's just been doing it a long time for some really, so it's funny, in our CMO group, somebody said to me, would you hire her? And I said, well, she knows two things. She knows cyber and she knows medical. So Are you one of those? She said,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
And I said, great. But, I mean, if you're looking for somebody who has relationships in real estate, like, don't go hire her. But if you're looking for, those very specific things where you have where she knows the people, where she has those relationships.
yeah,
I'll tell you, actually, you want to know what made me decide she was the right person? So there was a reporter who we had we were really excited about a story she was going to publish. She had done 2 interviews with us to one of our founders' passion project, so he was super super excited about it.
yeah.
And then the reporter went dark, and I emailed her a couple times. I'm like, hey, everything okay? Didn't hear back. Such is life. Reporters move on. There's other news. Got it. So I said to Danielle, this happened. If you could ever make this happen. So Danielle on the beat goes, oh, she's on maternity leave. Like, oh, this PR person knows when a reporter's on maternity leave. That's a pretty good relationship,
That's
right?
pretty good.
That's
Yeah.
pretty good.
Well, and if you're interested in deep industry PR, it probably also means you want to build relationships with analysts in that industry, with the influencers in the industry. Like every industry has people that, there's the trade press, there's the professional reporters, there's the analysts that may be former executives who are now advisors to companies in the industry. There are peer influencers, people that are just in the community that just have influence. So a good industry PR person can not only get you into that trade press and knows when someone is on maternity leave, like they can get you on stage. Like they can get you a meeting with an analyst earlier than maybe you otherwise could. Like they often know sort of the power brokers and power structure within a particular industry that is not obvious to a media map, that is not obvious even to LinkedIn, to help you navigate that system. I mean, those relationships can be worth their weight in gold.
Yeah, I mean, actually, so one of the things we should talk about is the different kinds of PR, because if you want to get your name out there, right? So one is there's the news of the day, and this happens a lot in cybersecurity. SolarWinds breach, for example, right? Do you want to be in the news of the day, right? Do you want to be in the Wall Street Journal or Business Insider when those reporters are thinking about writing that story? It's not going to be about you, but it's going to have your name and your quote, or your name and your company's name. Also, in doing that, you have to have somebody who internally, your expert, who's willing to drop everything and talk to a reporter. If you don't have that internally, you can't do that kind of PR. Then there's the stories about you. And sometimes that's press releases, and sometimes that's building a relationship with a reporter. And frankly, sometimes that's getting the opportunity to write a byline, that if you have a good PR person, you won't have to pay to do that. Um, or if all you want to do is write your own bylines, just pay Forbes $1,500 and you can go right over there.
Right.
And then there's the other kind of PR, which is the things you're talking about. So analysts, investor kind of PR, is sort of a third branch of PR. But those are all different things you can do in the PR bucket.
Well, and someone asked the question in the Slack channel earlier as well. Like, what are your objectives? Like, being really clear about what you want up front. Like, if you want media coverage, then obviously a PR firm with relationships is going to help you. When I was doing PR, there were no blogs, there was no social media. That you didn't have the ability to create your own media channel. Right. I mean, there were barely email newsletters at the time. I'm an old man now. So, so I think that if you think about what are your objectives, do you need a PR firm? Or do you need a content strategy, right? Like, do you need to get into are you trying to earn or rent attention from someone else's media channel? Or can you build and own your own? And that isn't something you can do immediately. It might be sort of like our short-term strategy is to leverage channels that exist, to leverage audiences that exist while we build our own audience, right? While we build our own media channels so we can eliminate the middleman, like the PR firm, let alone the media, so we can communicate directly to our end customer.
Yeah. I mean, it's figuring out what you want out of it. We talked about that before. I can't curse on LinkedIn, YouTube, and every other thing we're on, but let's just say that I don't know. Maybe I can, but there are some.
Years then.
Oh, good. There are some BS metrics.
Yeah.
out there. And I've seen some ones called AVE about value. People talk about impressions wrong, getting a bunch of likes on a Facebook post. Like, what? Come on. Like, if you are a B2B company, and this is a B2B chat here, your goal is not to have the masses love you. Your goal is to have that one company or the group of buyers at a company pay attention to you.
Yep.
And so, just because, all your kids and your parents went and liked a Facebook post because it had your picture on it isn't going to get you to your goals.
Yeah.
And so, and, there are PR companies that build these beautiful pie charts of impressions and AVE and all sorts of things that just don't matter.
Yeah. Well, and it's and I think that's another, we talk about hiring a PR firm. Like, how do you measure success? This is not direct response marketing. This is not like put out a press release or get coverage and all of a sudden your pipeline grows. It doesn't work that way.
Super
But
hard.
it's hard to measure, but equally, I think you could, to your point, you can cloud what matters by showing clip books. Like we used to literally hand clients once a month a clip book of where they were referenced. And it was even better if there was a particular month where we had a column that was syndicated. We get one columnist to write an article that maybe like in one line mention the client, but it was syndicated in 40 newspapers. We'd put every freaking newspaper in that book so that it was a lot bigger. And so all of a sudden your message got X amount of reach. Like assuming as if every recipient of that newspaper read that line in that column on Sunday on page like F47, right? So I think but there isn't a lot of outside of, if you haven't done PR before, if you're not in the media space, you can get really excited about vanity metrics, and it can.
So I have to tell you the most ridiculous one. I forgot this. The most ridiculous one is called potential market. So this came way back when newspapers. So let's take the Seattle Times. Their potential market. What's their distribution? How many people live in the Seattle area? So 3.5 million was your potential market. Well, but 3.5 million don't get it. You don't know if they read the newspaper. And now there's this thing called the internet. I think we're live on it right now.
Yeah.
So if somebody talks about your potential reach, well, sure, it's the whole world, right? Billions and billions of people could read about you. It's the most ridiculous metric. And and that goes back to your question. So how do you measure success? It's hard. It's hard to measure success. And if you get a PR company that says, "Oh, this will show immediate difference in your business,"
Yeah.
what it's about is building brand, and what it's about is putting your name out there and getting people to know you. And then when, depending on what business you're in, if something happens, being able to get coverage of it. And you know what, if that's for internal mojo, if you're doing charity events and you want coverage of that and you need to build the relationships to do it because it helps you with internal politics, cool. Like those are reasons to do this.
Okay, so we're not done, but just to recap so far, knowing what success looks like, very important. Why are you doing PR in the first place? What business objectives are you trying to achieve? And what are the measures of success you expect to have off of that? Even if you can't precisely measure it, articulate what the business impact you need from PR for your own sake as hiring a PR firm, as well as for clarity with the PR firm themselves. So that's one. Two, we talked an awful lot about storytelling and the importance of knowing the story that you have to tell, knowing that it's interesting to who you're reaching out to and therefore interesting to their audience, and then context, understanding when is appropriate to be able to share that story and when you should just shut up and let the news of the day happen without ruining a relationship with a chance for future conversations as well. I know, so we've been going for about 25 minutes. I know we've got probably have a hard stop here at a certain point. We can't talk about PR without talking about a little bit of pet peeves and some cautionary tales. I know you asked some people in your network to share some PR stories. And listen, I don't just do this for entertainment purposes, because I think, just like with prospecting emails, like I get a lot of really bad prospecting emails, people that want to sell me stuff. 100% of those emails were written with the best of intentions. 100% of those PR pitches were well-meaning by someone. Let's assume that they're not nefarious, like in trying to get a reporter's attention. And yet calling out those that don't land well, calling out those that sometimes, media and reporters make fun of, it's educational for the rest of us to say, okay, like, oh, I thought that was okay. Apparently that's not okay. Check that off the list. So I have a couple pet peeves I'd love to share, but I want to hear some of your stories.
Okay, so I'm going to read. So my Facebook page is all my news friends. So one is somebody who wanted a television station to cover a book release, and it was a book. It was a book that was supposed to go on a coffee table, and they actually sent a producer a coffee table, which is far and beyond more than a journalist can receive. And so they had to ship back the table, and no, they didn't get coverage. Another is somebody who called, and I was in the newsroom actually for this one. This is my assignment editor at the time. September 12th, 2001. Remember what happened the day before? PR person asked if we were going to cover their event. She said, we're in wall-to-wall coverage of the attack on America. PR person said, but that happened on the East Coast. Why are you talking about it here?
Wow.
Let's see. Another one in here. Somebody who calls and gets the wrong name of the television station they're calling, or calls 1 minute after the newscast starts. All of these things. This is like you don't know who you're calling.
Yeah.
This is all about those relationships. If you had these relationships, you would never make these things. But, the idea of calling when, somebody's in the middle of a school shooting or the day after a terrorist attack. Like if your PR firm called anybody the day that there was an insurrection at the Capitol, unless you're working in cybersecurity, because it had some implications, you have the wrong PR firm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of these sound like kind of basic things, but we see these mistakes continue to happen over and over again. I know you got to go in a couple minutes. A couple of my pet peeves, just from a language standpoint, that are always going to bother me. And like, I was guilty of this when I was at the PR firm back in the day as well. When you and I sit down to write a blog post or to write a white paper, like we write it, right? Like you're writing something. I don't understand why if I'm putting together a press release, it all of a sudden we're crafting a press release. It's crafting the press release, which I assume makes it more expensive, right? And so
it's with yarn.
Yes, apparently. So look, I mean, language matters, and people pick up on this stuff, and they're like, "What is crafting?" The other one that has always bugged me is you find out that a reporter's working on a story, and they've got a story, and you want to get you into that story, and the PR person tells you, "You know what? We know they're working on it. It's good. Their deadline's in a couple days. We're in touch with them. We're working on crafting, we're working on shaping that story. We're working on shaping the story." I didn't spend a lot of time in the media, not nearly what you did, but as a former reporter, as a former journalist, I'm offended that anyone thinks, especially a PR person, thinks that they're going to come and shape the story. Now, impact it, give me some insight, make my story better. Like those are all fine, but you're not going to shape my story.
Yeah, or I want to read the story before it's published.
Yeah, can we approve? Can we approve all the language, and we'll give you some copy edits? Well, very I know you got to go. This has been a lot of fun.
We'll do it again.
Thanks for doing it. We will definitely do it again. Everyone, thanks for watching. Be good. Hire good PR firms. Thanks.